Alright guys, welcome to your first actual real day of dual credit bio for majors. And what we're going to essentially do today is kind of look at what would be considered chapter 1. If we were using a textbook and we were going through that textbook, we would be looking at chapter 1, which is principles of life. And so to be honest with you, this particular lesson is not necessarily like testable material. It's really just an overview of all of the things that we're going to be learning over the next 2 semesters. And it's just kind of lumped together into some big ideas of biology. I'm also going to introduce to you what we're going to call the TC essays, but we are going to be handling them a little bit differently this year than what we have done in the past. And so let's just kind of go over the content first. You can fill out the handout, but once again, this isn't necessarily quizzable. I do want you to fill it out because there is going to be a section at the bottom that pertains to our first essay material. And so first off, you are in dual credit biology, and you took biology back in freshman year, and hopefully you already know that biology is the study of life or the study of living things. Now this is where it can get a little bit tricky because if we are studying biology, according to all biological concepts, evolution is there. Okay, so this statement that living things are all the diverse organisms that are descended from a single common ancestor, that is the biological explanation. And so one of the things that we're going to see all throughout the course, because it is in the background of just about everything that we cover, is the idea that living things evolve from other living things over long periods of time. Now, I know that sometimes this can have some conflict with maybe your personal religious beliefs, and I want you to know that in terms of this class, we are always teachers and not preachers. The teacher in your classroom and me, the teacher in the background, we are always here to give you the biology side of things, not our own personal belief systems. And so when it comes to your beliefs, you can take it or leave it, okay? Now, for this class and for the purposes of college level biology, you need to understand the concepts, but you do not have to take them as part of your own personal belief system. That is going to be 100% your call. But there are going to be things that are talked about that may not jive with your own belief system, and that's okay. You don't have to believe it, you just have to learn it. Okay, so I just want to make that very, very clear. Now, some of the evidence for this common ancestry, we know that science is all about evidence, is that all organisms share some key features. So whether it be a bacteria that is unicellular all the way up to a complex plant or human, there are certain things that pretty much all living things have in common. So we are similar in our chemical makeup. Things like, let's see, and I'm sorry, sometimes this highlighter does crazy things. You're going to find that in future PowerPoints. But we have similar components like nucleic acids, and that's going to be like your DNA and RNA. Your amino acids are going to be the building blocks that make up your proteins. And so these nucleic acids and amino acids are going to be common among all life. Same thing for cellular structures, things like cell membranes. This genetic info that we have is pretty much almost nearly universal. And so when we get to later in the semester, we're going to learn about protein synthesis and how the DNA codes for proteins, and that works for pretty much all life. Some other things that living things share is we all have different metabolic reactions that help us convert molecules from our surroundings into new biomolecules. Like plants can take in energy from the sun and convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars. And then as animals and other plants too, we can take these sugars and we can convert them into an energy form called ATP. All living things are going to have to use energy, and they're going to have to do work. All living things are going to maintain homeostasis, and this is just keeping internal conditions constant even though the outside changes. All living things are going to reproduce, and that's going to involve the replication of their genetic info. So that DNA that they have It's going to get replicated and new cells will be made. In terms of that genetic material, there are certain sequences that are what we consider kind of fundamental for life. And so even though we may be very different, all living things are going to share certain combinations of that genetic code. And then one of the big ones, like I said, this may conflict with what your personal belief system is, but all living things do change over time. Now, whether you agree with the full-scale concept of evolution, there's small evolution called micro, and then there's larger scale evolution called macro. But all living things are going to experience microevolution. We are going to see gradual changes in their genetic information, and that genetic information for a particular group does change over time. All right, so now what the rest of the PowerPoint's going to do is it's just going to kind of go over some big ideas that you will find throughout this class in biology. Once again, we kind of see some stuff that you may or may not agree with, but for biology purposes, the Earth is believed to be about 4.5 or a little over billion years old. Now, life did not occur in that very beginning stages. It took quite a while before we had our first life. And so the early Earth would have been fiery and volcanic, and it would not have been conducive for life. And so there were some changes that had to happen, like cooling and water. And so it's believed that at first we got some of these complex biological molecules, things like proteins, and then over the course of time, these complex molecules became enclosed in membranes, and then ultimately that would give rise to our first cells, which are believed to be the prokaryotes. And those are your bacterial type cells that do not have nuclei. We don't really go into a lot of depth of origin, but we will cover it in the second semester. Now, after prokaryotes, you would see a kind of a slow transition from prokaryotes that were not able to do cellular respiration and not able to do photosynthesis to, you would see the evolution of some of these processes. With the emergence of photosynthesis, that put oxygen into the atmosphere. That would then allow for aerobic metabolism, and you would just see continued diversification among the prokaryotes. Eventually, they would give rise to the eukaryotes, which do have nuclei and these complex internal structures, and that's believed to have happened through the process of endosymbiosis, and we'll talk about that a couple of times throughout the year. And eventually, your eukaryotes would go from simpler to more complex, all the way up to multicellular organisms that are highly specialized. Some other things that would help contribute would be things like mutations. You know, how do these changes occur over time? How did we get new processes or new methods of metabolism? Well, mutations in the genes could lead to both structural and functional changes. And based on this molecular data, when we look at life, we group it into one of 3 domains. And so we'll talk about taxonomy and classification in second semester. But essentially, when it comes to life, we have 3 domains, and all organisms are going to fit into one of these 3. So archaea and bacteria are both prokaryotic domains. Archaeans are kind of extremophile weirdos. They live in extreme locations like very hot or very salty or very acidic. Bacteria are your more common everyday prokaryotes, and then eukarya are all of those organisms that have nuclei in their cells, and that includes protists and fungi and plants and animals like us. All right, now our next big idea has to do with pretty much the flow of information and genetics, and so we know that our genetic information is in our genes, which is they're just specific sequences of DNA. The sequence of the nucleotides, this is important. It's the sequence of those nucleotides, the A's, the T's, the C's, the G's. Hopefully you remember a little bit about DNA, but that's essentially what holds the information for building our proteins. So the DNA determines the sequence of amino acids in our proteins, and then our proteins essentially give us our traits. And so when it comes to your organisms like us, where we're multicellular, we're made up of trillions of cells. Every single one of those cells has the exact same set of genetic instruction, the exact same genome, but different cells specialize and they express different parts of that genome or different genes, and that means they're going to have different functions and do different things. So there's just kind of your basic code for life. The DNA contains the genes, which codes for RNA, which then in turn codes for proteins. And so different cells may express different genes, and that's why they're going to make different proteins and do different things. In terms of the genome, humans, I don't think they have a final number yet, and even this number may be outdated, but around 24,000. Number of genes does not necessarily indicate complexity, because there are organisms that have more genes than we do that we would not necessarily consider super complex. But this is a field of biology that is continuously advancing. Genome sequencing and allowing us to compare genomes has really revolutionized things like medicine and kind of determining those evolutionary relationships. All right, another big idea is that organisms interact and also affect their environment. And so this is where you get into things like ecology, our organization of life. This is one of our characteristics, is that life is organized. And so we have these non-living factors like atoms making up molecules and macromolecules and organelles, and then life begins at the cell. Now, if you're a unicellular organism, that's pretty much where that organization stops, but in multicellular organisms, it continues on. Cells make up tissues, which make up organs, which make up systems. That makes up the organism. And then that carries on into your ecological groupings like populations and communities, all the way up to the biosphere. And so life does begin at the cellular level. So there's your basic organization of life, and we'll see that popping up a couple of times throughout the year. All right, living things are going to have to use nutrients in order to build new structures. So we know that we have to eat. We have to eat for energy, and we have to eat, in order to build molecules like new proteins and things in our bodies. And so metabolism is essentially all of those chemical reactions that are taking place in our body. And metabolism is going to be essential. It's not just diet and exercise. It's also going to be all of the building and breaking of all the different molecules in our body. Here's that homeostasis thing again. Once again, organisms must maintain homeostasis. We do this by negative feedback mechanisms, and we'll talk about those at a later time. This is where we really get into the ecology aspect, which is second semester. But organisms interact with each other. There's different types of interactions like predator-prey relationships or competition over resources. Or you could have those symbiotic relationships like parasitism, mutualism, commensalism. We've learned about those back in freshman biology, and that's normally something students understand pretty well. And then another big idea, once again, here we are back to this term of evolution, but evolution explains the diversity and unity of life. Once again, these particular terms and words are going to be all over the course. And so I do want to clarify their definitions, okay, because sometimes students will mix these two up. They are not the same thing. And this particular slide, these two definitions here are definitely something that you need to know for this essay material that I'm about to talk about. So evolution is the change in the genetic makeup of a population over time. So hopefully you remember that an individual cannot evolve. It is a group or a population of organisms that evolves. But essentially, if you have these little small changes in their genetic makeup, certain alleles increase, certain alleles decrease, that is evolution, a change in the genetic makeup of a population over time. Now, natural selection, which was introduced by Charles Darwin, this is a mechanism of evolution, so they are not the same thing. This is a way, notice I said a way, it's not the only way, but this is a way that change can happen. It's probably the most common way, and it's essentially based on differential survival and reproduction. So this is the idea of survival of the fittest, the idea that some individuals within a population have a higher chance of survival, and if they are more likely to survive, they're more likely to reproduce and pass on those traits. And this is what leads to adaptations. So these are the traits that increase your chance of survival. And so this is why we see certain traits like more fat in a cold environment, or more hair in a cold environment, or you'll see things like ways to store water in plants that live in the desert, or deeper root systems. So those things don't necessarily just come out of nowhere. It's because certain individuals with certain traits within a population have a higher chance of survival and reproduction. And that goes back to the concept of variation. That goes back to the concept of sexual reproduction. But essentially, natural selection can lead to a change in the genetic makeup. So natural selection is a way that evolution can happen. And so here's just an example with the mice, okay? It doesn't necessarily turn them into something completely different. They're still mice. They still look the same. They still act the same. The only difference would be the coloration. And so sometimes people have these misconceptions that evolution means something turning into something else, and that's not necessarily the case. And so that actually wraps up the PowerPoint, but I do want to go ahead and talk about this essay material. So one of the things that I'm required to do over on the TC side is I have to collect SLO data. And so in your syllabus, there are certain SLOs that it's kind of like the TEKS that you have to do for high school, but it's the student learning objectives. And so there's certain things that we have to cover, and then as with any teacher, we have to kind of have some documentation that we covered that material. Now, one of the SLOs for the first semester of dual credit biology deals with evolution. Now, I'm going to be honest with you and say that we primarily cover evolution in the second semester. Okay, so this is really going to be the only time that we're going to talk about it. After this, we're going to go into basic science concepts, and then we're going to move into biochemistry and cells, and then pretty much the rest of the semester will be all about cellular level. Now, to kind of introduce not only the scientific process, but also these ideas about evolution, there's a video that is shown here on the TC campus by the dual credit or by the biology for majors professor, and it's Darwin's dangerous idea. So there are certain things that aren't necessarily what I would do, but I kind of have to follow the basic guidelines and outlines of the professor who teaches this class on campus. I don't actually teach biology on the TC campus. I teach anatomy and physiology. And so I am kind of required and expected to do similar things to the teacher here on campus. So one of the things that he does is he has certain essays. And sometimes they're long, like written out essays with paragraphs, which I don't really care for. Sometimes they're diagrams that you fill out. But I'm going to kind of take a different approach for some of these essays this year. So in the past, this was the essay. And on the TC side, they have to write these on the day of the test. But essentially, the essay states, describe the history of the scientific theory of biological evolution by natural selection. It's focusing on Darwin, and that's what this video is all about. It's about how Darwin came up with the idea and how he was kind of fearful of publishing. And the video kind of focuses on Darwin's cheerleaders and Darwin's opposition. And so for the essay, the expectation is that you define these two terms. We just covered that in the notes. And then you kind of have to give some information about the people in the video and how they either supported or opposed Darwin. Now, instead of writing the essay this year, we're going to do something different. I'm simply going to make a quiz, okay? So in class, you're going to watch the video. It's going to take you a couple of days, okay? It's not super short. It's also probably not action-packed. It may not be the most exciting film you've ever seen in your life, but you do need to focus on the video, okay? Do not just go and Google, all right? Because when I make this quiz, I'm going to make this quiz based on the essay that you would have written. And the essay is not a Google essay, okay? The essay is going to be coming from the video. And so I will create questions from the video, okay? Now this sheet is just used to kind of help you jot some things down. Some of these people, like Raz, that's Darwin's brother, he's seen all throughout the video. And so as you see Raz, maybe just jot down anything it makes you think of. But it's not about a Google answer. We don't need to know when they were born. We don't need to know anything else that they did. All we need to know is their relationship to Darwin and his ideas on natural selection, okay? So over the next couple of days, just kind of keep this sheet handy, jot down some things that you notice about each one, and then after the video is completed, you will take a quiz, and that is going to take the place of the written out essay. So just know we are going to take a different approach. I promise you this is a much better approach, but you do need to make sure that you are watching the video and jotting down some notes. You will not be allowed to use these notes on the quiz, but you need something to maybe study. The video will also be posted on Google Classroom for you, so if you missed a day or if you fell asleep, you can always go back and watch the pieces that you need to watch. And so just be prepared. In terms of the notes that we just covered on the principles of life, once again, there's not necessarily a quiz over this whole PowerPoint, but this last little section here, there's a definition for evolution and there's a definition for natural selection, okay? So you might want to use that to kind of help you out and prepare for the essay or the quiz portion of this material. And that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you have had a great start to school. You're going to get a little bit of a break and that you're watching a video over the next couple of days. And I hope you guys have a great weekend. I will see you soon. And please feel free to email me with any questions that you may have. Y'all have a great one. Bye.